Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Philly Factor. I'm your host, Paul Perrello. I am pleased to have with us here on the program an author from Bucks County. He's a Bucks County resident, more importantly, graduate of LaSalle College back in the day. He graduated a few years before me from LaSalle College, but he was quite the accomplished advertising copywriter executive in the greater Philadelphia area for many, many years. And he joins us to talk about his latest venture, which is his new book. Mike Diccicco, thanks for being with us.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me here. And by the way, just so that my family doesn't get mad at you, we don't pronounce our name correctly. We pronounce it Diccicco. The real Italians pronounce it Diccicco. So you're right on the money. I can't help what my family does.
Well, we Italians, we're a crazy bunch of people anyway. So, and ironically, right before we started, I even asked Tanya, I says, it's the Chico, right? And so, anyway, thanks for being with us and thanks for the correction. And I want to commend you and congratulate you on your new book. The name of the book is Beyond All Sense and Reason. We'll get into what this book is all about, but Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, for the longest time, and from the longest time that I can remember, you were very active and busy in the advertising world in the greater Philadelphia area. And if I read your bio correctly, have you retired? Have you stepped away from it?
I have definitely stepped away from it. So I tell people it was a 46-year career. Starting out with the notion that I wanted to write award-winning radio commercials and TV spots and stuff that everyone would remember. And after 46 years, I gave that a pretty good shot for my money and was able to sell the business to another organization and retired in 2019, August of 2019. So I retired 6 months before this pandemic hit. And for everyone else, and for me as well, it was a challenge, but it also gave me a lot of time to finish up the novel that had been stirring and stewing for about 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people have spent these past 2 years not only changing course or changing direction, but finding themselves with a lot of time on their hands and really digging into projects that they always put on the back burner. Oh, I'll get to it someday, or yeah, I'm going to put that off to next week. And we found ourselves with a lot of time on our hands. And in your case, it allowed you to dive into this book that had been brewing. And what I found remarkable is that this is, of course, the big question when people read this book, they'll say, well, is this, based on Mike's life? And one thing that I found astonishing is that you actually grew up down south and during a time that there was great tumult in this country during the civil rights movement. So give us a little bit about your backstory growing up down south and how this story sort of percolated in you for all these years.
Well, my brothers and sisters especially keep saying, Mike, is this an autobiography? Is this a memoir? It is not. But they are convinced when they read parts of it, they're saying, oh, no, Mike, you got this part of it wrong, or where am I in the story? So the situation, the reality was that my family moved to Birmingham when I was in second grade, and I grew up there through graduating from high school before I came to LaSalle College. And I lived there during what I call the heat and the heart of the civil rights movement, which was 1963 and 1964. When I started high school at John Carroll High School, which was the only Catholic high school in the city of Birmingham, it was not integrated. It actually integrated in 1964. My novel takes place from June of 1963 through September of 1964. So through the heart of maybe the most turbulent time in Birmingham's history, this story was played out. But it is definitely fiction. None of the characters are real people. I borrowed a lot from my youth. I borrowed a lot from the fact that I have 10 brothers and sisters, and the McQuaid family, which is the main character's family, has 8 siblings, or eight kids, and 9 kids in the family. So there are a number of comparisons. I used the real name of my high school. I used, there's a whole chapter devoted to my main character selling Cokes at the Alabama-Auburn game at Legion Field. Yes, I did that as well. And I'm proud to say I have Joe Namath's autograph. But it's still not an autobiography, it's fiction.
What was it like? I mean, oftentimes we hear the horror stories of what was going on in this country, and in particular in Birmingham during the turbulent 60s. But for a kid like yourself and your siblings, what, from your perspective, I mean, now, many, many years later, you could sit back and sort of reflect on all this, but growing up in Birmingham, were you aware, or were your siblings aware of what exactly was going on at that time in Birmingham and how that would ripple over and affect the history of the United States?
I would say probably not. So to explain, I was the second oldest in a family of 11. So many of my younger brothers and sisters, and I've asked them about this, I said, what do you recall from that time? And to a certain extent, we were shielded from a lot of what was going on, and picked up information from conversations that my parents had, or conversations that they had with their friends. What I think we did experience were little bits of racism and bigotry in our ordinary lives. And one of them that struck me, as a matter of fact, I wrote a short story about it, that struck me was when you would get on a bus, there was always a sign in the front of the bus for years that said "colored to the rear." And that meant that everyone who was an African American was supposed to sit far back in the bus to make sure that all the white people had a seat to sit down in. You and I both know that that is absurd. And this continued long after the Rosa Parks incident in the 50s. What happened to me one time, I was coming home from basketball practice. I had to ride the bus, and I got on the bus. This was after an agreement between the city and Martin Luther King and a number of other people had gotten the city to take those signs down. So now African Americans could sit wherever they wanted to sit in a bus. I got on the bus, and there were 8 to 10 to 12 white people standing in a little mass at the front of the bus. And when I broke through that crowd, I saw an entire busload of seats. The only thing was, to have a seat, you would have to sit next to an African American. So I promptly did that because I was coming home from basketball practice, and I thought that was silly not to sit down. But when I did, I looked up and had 10 or 12 white people looking back at me, acting as if, well, what is that crazy white boy doing there? Well, why is he sitting down to, at the time, what was known as a colored person? So it was those kinds of things. And maybe, if you don't mind, I'd like to tell the audience about a really terrific website if they're interested. It's called Kids in Birmingham 1963. And it was started by a woman who lived in Birmingham during that time as a young teenager. And she wanted to collect the stories and the memories of people like myself who were 13, 14, 15 years old at the time. So this website has a collection of some 60 memories, short 4, 5, 6 paragraph recollections of of people who lived there during that time and who will give their memories, their recollections of what it was like. And it's fascinating to read them. For me, it was a tremendous motivation as I was writing the book to keep writing, to try and tell, even though it was a fictional story, to try and tell an authentic story for the times.
Now, the book then has been brewing for years, and you started it, put it down, would go back and revisit, and then pick up again. And really, this was, some authors will say, well, it takes me 2 years to write a book. And some authors will say, that, it takes me 10 years to write a book. And every author is different, needless to say. So did you always feel that deep down inside that you needed to tell this story, express this story, and perhaps some of the lessons that your characters went through in the 1960s are just as relevant today in terms of some of the themes in the book? Like they're, some of those themes still are out there today. Unfortunately, you would think that we should have turned a corner on all this years ago. But was this your compulsion for your lifetime to know that you had to write this book? This story had to be told.
I think compulsion is probably a fair word, but it wasn't a driving compulsion for many years. So let me just give you the quick story on the chronology of the book. I think I started writing it in 2012 or so. And it was after many years of saying to my wife, yeah, I've got to write a book someday. And her saying to me, how's that book coming? And I kept saying, well, I'm not quite ready yet. So one day I sat down, I wrote maybe 1,000 words, and I came downstairs and I read it to her and I said, what do you think? This to me sounds like a book. She says, yeah, that sounds like a book. And so that's where it started. But the first version of it, which I finished, it probably took me 14 months to write it. The first version of it I call the fat version. It was about 115,000 words. That's really long for a commercial novel this day and age. And it had, in my mind, as I looked back on it years later, it had too many things that were fun for me to write, but they weren't really moving the story forward. So in 2019, as I had mentioned earlier, when I had an opportunity to have time on my hands and to really do a rewrite, I jumped into that part of it. Got it down to about 100,000 words, got an editor working with me, and I think it's a much tighter story now. But the real compulsion about this book actually comes from what I call Diccicco family legend. And that is my older sister, Michelle, who passed away in 2002. The legend in our family was that she received her first teenage kiss from an African-American boy in Clarksdale, Mississippi, when she was on a school field trip. It was a mission type of a project. And I thought about that and thought many times about the risk and the danger that the two of them took in exchanging what should have been the most innocent of expressions of friendship. But if they had been caught, if that boy had been caught kissing a white girl, the repercussions would have been terrible. Because that thought stayed with me all these years, I ended up saying, okay, I need to write a story about the racism of the South that occurred behind the scenes, away from the cameras, away from the police dogs and the fire hoses, the little issues that represented what bigotry meant at that time.
So this story about your sister, I mean, you call it a legend. I mean, did she ever, was it ever discussed? I mean, I would think that there would be, given the history and the times that she lived in and your family lived in, there would be serious repercussions for her as well, not only for the boy for kissing her, but did she ever vocalize the story to your parents or to you or to another sibling? And was there a fear of repercussions even for her, given the times?
I don't think, and by the way, when she passed away, I was not even involved with thinking about the book much at that time. But it was later when I started to write it and I got into the characters and the issues that they were facing. I started wondering about it, and I realized, Mike, you were an idiot. You never really asked your sister about that because we were the two oldest. It would have been a natural conversation.
Sure.
So for years, I just had it in my head without really knowing, was it legend? Was it real? But then just recently, within the past year, all of a sudden a duh moment hit me. And I said, well, if she talked about it with anyone, and I know she didn't talk about it at the time, but years later, she would have talked about it with my sister, Mary. So I called Mary up and I said, Mary, did Michelle ever talk to you about this? And my sister confirmed that it actually occurred, and then went off on a tailspin because she couldn't remember the name of the young man who kissed my sister. So they were never caught at the time, and my sister didn't make much of it at the time. So there were no repercussions that happened either within the family or within his, thankfully.
Let's discuss a little bit about the name of the book. I mean, because it's a book that sort of stirs interest, and it sort of piqued my interest, not only because you wrote it, but Beyond All Sense and Reason. Where does that title come from?
Well, actually, it's the second title of the book. For years, when I had written it, I had titled it For No Good Reason. And then just before I was getting very close to moving from writing to the publishing phase, I discovered there were a couple of other books out there with that same name, For No Good Reason. You can't copyright the title of books. But because I am a no-name author with a debut novel, I wanted at least to have my title unique. So Beyond All Sense and Reason, for me, exists as a good title on 2 or 3 different levels. And in some sense, it speaks to segregation simply as an idea. And if I think about it today, I keep saying to myself, where did the people of this country get a hold of the notion that this was a good thing and that they kept pushing it? I remember hearing time and time again the idea of the Southern way of life, the way we do things down here. And if you examine that, there is no sense to that whatsoever. On a smaller scale, Beyond All Sense and Reason applies to the moments of bigotry and prejudice that my main characters experienced during the 14 months that where the story takes place. For instance, there's a scene where my main character, Mickey, is going into a burger place with his African-American friend named Jackie. And the kid who's at the counter says, no, we're not going to serve him here. And then I looked up the ordinance from the city of Birmingham, and it was the most ridiculous statement about what had to happen within a restaurant if they wanted to serve both African Americans and white people in the same restaurant. They needed to have a partition at least 7 feet tall. They had to have separate entrances. If there was anything ever that is beyond all sense and reason. It was the people who wrote those ordinances for Birmingham city government. Crazy.
Wow. Yeah, for sure. In the few minutes that we have left, Mike, I mean, what do you hope readers of your book, what do you hope they take away from this?
I have actually been asked that question a few times, and I keep saying, well, do I have a message? I don't think I have a message, or I started out with a message. What I wanted to do was I wanted to tell a story that engaged people, that was authentic to the times, that would elicit some kind of emotional response for the relationship. I call it ordinary kids living in extraordinary times. But if there is a message, now that I reflect back, I would say we haven't made as much progress as we think we have. And I still see it in the world around us. All you have to do is look at some of that video from Charlottesville, and you say, wait a minute, I thought we were way past that.
Sure.
And we are not yet. Many of us are, but we are not yet there as a country. And that's where I think we need to be.
Let me ask you, you have written some outstanding commercial copy over your career, leading one of the major advertising agencies in the greater Philadelphia area. This experience then in writing this book, what has that been like for you?
They always talk about in the advertising business, every copywriter is simply marking time until he can get his novel finished. And I know many terrific copywriters. We have some of them in the city. My hero is a Philadelphia copywriter who I thought she was one of the best copywriters in the city. She left the business and has now published 7 novels.
Wow.
Kelly Simmons is her name. She's a terrific writer. And I think she personified what so many of us felt like, hey, we'll write about, and I did write about Hatfield hot dogs and Mayor's breads and Primavera software. And I loved that work when I did it at the time. But writing a novel and telling a story is just so much more satisfying. I should have started earlier.
Wow. I want to mention here that there are a few websites that we want our viewers to check out. Of course, one of those websites where you can find more about Mike is his website, which is Mike Diccicco, correct? I got
yes.
it. Okay. MikeDicciccoWords.com. That's his website. And we also want you to check out Kids in Birmingham, 1963, the site there that Mike was just talking about a few minutes ago. And that is Kids in Birmingham, 1963.org. It's my understanding also, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, that I guess a portion of the proceeds from your book are being funneled toward that organization.
I do not have approval yet from the organization's board, but my wife and I have decided that 15% of whatever, and this will not be a windfall for anybody,
Sure.
but 15% of whatever we realize as author proceeds will be donated to some organization who is working on the civil rights question. If we get approval from that board, it will go to Kids in Birmingham.
I'm hard pressed to believe that if any organization is approached about a donation, that they're going to turn it down. So I hope that does.
I think they want to read the book first.
Sure. That makes sense.
I think that's it. Well, and one person has read it, but a couple more need to read it, and everyone needs to be comfortable. Okay, we're cool associating with this story.
Do you have another book in you after this one?
Oh, so I have been asked that question as well. I've got about 5,000 or 6,000 words into a second novel, but it is crazy different. This book, by the way, I need to show it. Of course, you got to show it on TV. This book was the story that has been in my soul. The next one would be a more commercial enterprise, I guess. And I guess I would describe it at the moment as a paranormal love story. But to tell you the truth, I've written 6,000 words, and I don't know if it's any good yet. So I'll keep writing and see what I feel.
Do you miss the everyday hustle and bustle of your previous life in the advertising and copywriting department?
Not for a moment. The best day of your life, I think, or one of the best days of your life, is when you retire and you wake up the next day and all the stress has gone away. So the only thing I miss, I worked with so many terrific people over the years, and I miss seeing them on a regular basis. But the work itself, it was fun for 46 years, and then I was glad to walk away.
Well, congratulations on the book, Mike. We should mention that the book is available on Amazon, and you can check out the book online. You can check out Mike's website. Again, congratulations. It's a great read. And hopefully, if I'm still around when that next book comes out, we'll have you back on and discuss that book as well.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it, Paul.
All right, Mike. Thank you so much for being with us on this edition of the Philly Factor. Until next time, have a great day, stay safe, and we'll see you again on the Philly Factor.